All right, folks, welcome to my talk called 10 Reasons to Try Kotlin Multiplatform. Thank you, Serge, for the introduction. I'm from JetBrains and I represent this technology. So I want to begin by asking you a question. Do you agree with the following statements? And of course, this kind of implies that I kind of hope that you do. So the first one is, I want to avoid code duplication by sharing code on a variety of platforms using an awesome modern language. I wonder what language that could be. I want to adopt this technology flexibly in my new and existing projects with minimal risk. And lastly, I want to know that I'm not alone in this journey of adoption. And if this sounds like you, then Kotlin Multiplatform by JetBrains is the technology for you and your projects. And in this presentation, I'm going to give you 10 reasons why I say so. And I'm going to bolster these reasons with case studies from real companies. So before we had Kotlin Multiplatform, whenever we developed an application, we would do so in silos. So for example, I had an Android, iOS, and desktop application. Each one of these would have sort of the similar layers, data layers, business domain layers, presentation and UI layers, but they would all be sort of developed in a separate way. Now, with Kotlin Multiplatform, you can go ahead and share anything that you want to share that is not platform-specific code. So you can do, for example, a small little piece of logic that you want to share amongst the three platforms, even server. You can share those, or you can code whatever you want to do in a platform-specific way. And the choice is really yours, what you want to share and what you don't want to share. So what platforms are supported? Well, it's server, so mostly JVM here. Mobile, which includes Android and iOS. Desktop, which is macOS, Windows, and Linux. Web, which includes JS and WASM. And so I want to go back to the first statement that we had and when we started out. And I basically said, I asked if you agreed with the statement, I want to avoid code duplication by sharing code on a variety of platforms using an awesome modern language. Now, my first reason is I want to avoid duplication. So I'm going to sort of support this reason with the story of the Wonder app by Baidu. Now, Baidu is the largest Chinese language search engine in the world. And the Wonder app by this company is for younger users for educational and entertainment content. And they had two apps. They had an Android app and an iOS app, but they had the following couple of problems when they were developing these applications. So they really had inconsistencies in their app experience. So they developed Android and iOS basically at the same time, but the way that the one app worked was different from the way that the other app worked. There were some experience differences between the two platforms. There was also high cost of verifying the business logic and high upgrade and maintenance costs. And finally, they said the complex and inconsistent logic of the iOS and Android platforms led to increasing maintenance costs for that. It was costing them not just money, but also time. So they decided to do a little experiment. They decided to experiment with Kotlin Multiplatform, and they started out by unifying the data layer, that bottom layer that we just saw of that diagram. And so they decided to unify the data model, the RESTful API requests, some JSON data parsing, and the caching logic. And when they did this experiment, they found that that was actually super, super successful. So what they decided is to adopt a pattern called MVI. Now, maybe if you're familiar with user interface patterns, MVI is model view intent. It is a pattern that allows you to unify the interface logic with Kotlin Multiplatform even more. So then they decided to take a step further and also share the low-level data, the processing logic, and the UI processing logic. So this was the results. And this is just roughly a diagram of what they were sharing. So they were not sharing the UIs, the UI layer. They were just sharing the data, business, and presentation layers. So this was the results. They had a more consistent experience between Android and iOS. They had a reduced cost of maintenance and testing, and they had improved productivity. Bravo. Next reason has to do with the extensive list of supported platforms. Now, for Kotlin Multiplatform, that is server. Again, this is JVM, Android, iOS, desktop, web, which includes JS and WASM. Now, perhaps you haven't heard of WASM before. It's just a binary instruction format for portable virtual machines, and it is smaller and faster than JavaScript. You basically write your code in a language like Kotlin and you compile it to WASM. And it's already supported in most modern browsers and Node.js. So WASM also works in the cloud, and the serverless folks are getting super excited about it. So that was just a little side quest for WASM. I want to get back to the main story, which is the story of Quizlet. Now, Quizlet is another case study that we're going to be looking at to support this reason. So Quizlet is a learning platform that helps people learn and practice what they learn through quizzes. And they have about 50 million active users per month, of which 10 million of them are for Android, and they're also top 10 in the education category on the App Store for iOS. So they tried other technologies like JavaScript, React Native, and even C++, Rust, and Go. For JavaScript, they had some issues with performance and stability and variance across manufacturer implementations of the web views. Then for React Native, they had some user experience and developer experience issues, and the C++ Rust and Go combination was more server-side, and they actually realized they wanted their business logic on the client side. So finally, they decided on Kotlin Multiplatform, and they used it on the Android, iOS, and web platforms. So this was the results. Firstly, they had more type-safe API for when they were marshalling objects, not just type-safe, but also null-safe because of Kotlin's null safety features. The performance on Android and iOS also improved. They had a 25% faster grading algorithm on iOS that with their Kotlin multi-platform version than the JavaScript version, which is quite an improvement. They also had the Android app size decreased from 18 megs to about 10 megs. They also had a better developer experience, obviously because they were using Kotlin and because there was great tooling support available for this language. And the different team members in the were keen to try writing the shared code. So initially it was just Android, iOS, and backend engineers that wanted to write shared code. But eventually, even the web developers were impressed with Kotlin. Another scenario that is quite common and that we don't often think about is sharing code between clients and servers. Now, I know that I've, for example, wanted to share data models in one of the previous companies that I worked with. And they actually decided to use a technology called protobufs or protocol buffers. And it is a language neutral, platform neutral language where you essentially create a proto file that's sort of like almost like a schema definition or just a data structure definition of what your data model should look like, and then you sort of generate code into like Go or Kotlin or Swift for these different platforms that you're going to support. So as I mentioned in this slide here, you can use it with any language where there is a generator like Go. But unfortunately, the format that you have to learn is, firstly, it's another format, yet another one. And it is also quite particular. You know, you can easily get into trouble with, a wrong space here or there. You also need to, whenever you change your proto files, you have to regenerate it on all platforms so that and then commit it in, and so on and so forth. So it is quite an arduous process for sharing data models. Instead, you can share your data models with Kotlin Multiplatform. And you can use a familiar language with great tooling. I wonder if that's Kotlin. Yes, it is. You can write it. You can write your code once and use it everywhere. And the only thing that you really have to be very aware of is whether it works on for all your platforms, on all the languages that you need for those platforms. So for server side, that is only JVM. Languages like Go will not be supported. My third reason is because Kotlin. So um, Kotlin aims to be pragmatic. So when we talk about Kotlin in terms of languages and the idealistic things that we want to do with Kotlin, it actually favors things like readability over concision. Just because a program is very short and concise doesn't make it a good one. Instead, if we can eliminate boilerplate that doesn't have to be read, that is actually better than just being concise. So we favor readability over concision. Then in Kotlin, we favor reuse over expressiveness. Now, expressiveness means that you can solve a whole bunch of problems, but you actually want to not just solve a whole bunch of problems, you also want to be able to extract patterns out of out of your code and make libraries with it. So you want to, take even more, get more bang for your buck out of your code. You also want interoperability over originality. It's great to have original, unique features, but it's even better to stand on the shoulders of giants like Java and learn from them, learn what worked for them and what didn't work for them. And what was nice about, the initial stages of Kotlin was that it was interoperable with Java, so we could reuse so much of the Java ecosystem that already existed. So we favor interoperability over originality. And then lastly, we favor safety and tooling over soundness. Now, soundness has to do with making sure that your program doesn't get into invalid states. And that's great, but wouldn't it be even better if you can catch those errors at compile or even just writing time, editing time with your IDEs and with your compilers? So Kotlin is ultimately designed to make developers happier. Now, this was last year's KotlinConf keynotes survey that we did. And we wanted to check with a general programming language, environment, the people that were using Kotlin, were they happy with it? And 86% of them said yes. So I know that this survey has been done again, and the number has increased even more. But you're going to have to wait for the KotlinConf keynote to find out what exactly that is. So how does Kotlin make developers happier? Well, some of the reasons are it makes them more productive because it eliminates that boilerplate. There's fewer crashes because of certain features in Kotlin that allows for it to be more safe. And that sort of ties in with the next point with improved safety and correctness. So all in all, it makes you productive and it allows you to create awesome code. So where is Kotlin used? Well, mostly for Android at the moment, but there is also server side, and we've seen a very big uptake in. I know there's a big section that says other, but we know that there's people using Kotlin for data science now with Kotlin notebooks and Candy and things like that coming up. We know that there's a lot of IoT things happening. We know, there's all kinds of different things happening with Kotlin. So it's not just for Android and not just for Android and server side, it's also for other things as well. So, of the top 1,000 apps in the Play Store, 95% of them use Kotlin, and 23% of that same data set use Jetpack Compose. Now, Jetpack Compose is a technology by Google that allows you to create user interfaces in a declarative way using Kotlin APIs. Now, um, I want to get back to the server side because we also want to not neglect our server side friends. We've got web frameworks for Kotlin called Ktor and HTTP4K. Those are sort of the Kotlin first server web frameworks. Then there's also very large, web frameworks like Spring, Micronaut, and Quarkus that you can use Kotlin with, but they are more sort of Kotlin friendly. My next sort of statement that we kind of agreed with, I hope, is that I want to adopt this technology flexibly in my new and existing projects with minimal risk. Now, of course, my next reason is I can choose what I want to share and what I want to write natively. So before Kotlin Multiplatform, I didn't have a choice. I had to write it all natively. But I can go ahead with Kotlin Multiplatform and share business logic, presentation logic, or even with Compose Multiplatform, the UI logic. So the only thing that is kind of left in this scenario is to do in a platform-specific way is whatever you want. So the truth of the matter is that you can share almost anything that you want to share that is not platform specific code. So it's not things like sensors or things like that. You can also share UI code, as we saw in our third slide. You can share UI code. So I mentioned Jetpack Compose a couple of slides back, and you can write, this is a technology by Google that allows you to create beautiful looking UIs. But there's also a technology by JetBrains, and you can see that little arrow that points at JetBrains. And this is the Compose multi-platform sort of landing page. And Compose Multiplatform sort of supports Android, iOS, desktop, and web, so the WASM targets. And so you can write UI code that is multi-platform, and that is what Compose Multiplatform is. So this is the status of these different this is the status of these various platforms. So Android and desktop for Compose Multiplatform are stable. For iOS, it is in alpha and going to beta soon. And for WASM, it is still experimental. This is for Compose Multiplatform. Kotlin Multiplatform is stable for Android, iOS, and desktop, while WASM, I believe, is still, I think, alpha, experimental or alpha. So that is, there are two separate things. Kotlin Multiplatform is mostly stable. It is just for sharing logic, and for sharing UI, you have Compose Multiplatform, and that's this graphic. So I want to tell you a case study of the story. I want to tell you the story of Instabee. Now, Instabee is a Scandinavian app that you started using Compose Multiplatform in its alpha state already, and they're sort of like a package retrieval service, almost like a postnet of some kind. And they started using Compose Multiplatform for their Android and iOS applications, sharing UI logic already in the alpha state. So there is also a couple of other apps that you can go look at that are beautiful and fully functional. And the one is the official sample called the Image Viewer app, and it runs on Android, iOS, desktop, and web. And it has integration with native components like the maps and camera and so on. There's also a community sample that you can have a look at, the New York Times app clone. So it runs even on Wear OS for watches, and that is Google's watch operating system. And if you just heard a big bang in the background, that is Gauteng's very famous thunderstorms. So we've got some rain on the way. Isn't that lovely? And then lastly, there is finally a modern desktop development framework. For so many years, you on a JVM sort of on a JVM platform, there was only really Swing or Java, JWT, things that you could really use. But now there is a modern declarative framework like Compose Multiplatform that you can use to create desktop applications. Of course, there were things like Electron, but those are more web technologies in actual fact. So we can also use Kotlin Multiplatform to in new or existing projects. And we've actually seen the existing project scenario before when we looked at the example of the Wonder app by Badoo. Well, they already had their Android and iOS app, and they just unified the logic. They started unifying more and more libraries or more and more logic, doing some refactoring, but unifying things using Kotlin Multiplatform and then sharing amongst the apps, the platforms. The story of 9gag sort of illustrates the new project scenario. 9gag is, of course, the funnies, videos, and images platform, the website, and the different apps. And they did also try other technologies like React Native, where they had some scaling issues. They had performance issues, increasing app sizes, and so on. They also tried Flutter, where they had less of a performance app size issue, but they found that image and video features were concerning for them. So finally, they settled on Kotlin Multiplatform, where they could align the behavior of the app on both platforms. They started with Android, and then they consumed the Kotlin Multiplatform library or project as a dependency on iOS. And that is how they started using Kotlin Multiplatform as a new project. So you can also start using Kotlin Multiplatform by starting really small and starting sharing gradually. So you can start small with just constants, migrating common utilities like perhaps email validation, your regexes, and so on. You can also write or migrate your business logic. For example, if you think of transaction stuff, login, sign up, that kind of thing, you can migrate that and start sharing that logic slowly but surely. So this is a diagram of a survey done a while back, and this is specifically for Kotlin Multiplatform. So this has to do with business logic, various forms of logic, not Compose Multiplatform, which is the UI logic. So this is for Kotlin Multiplatform. And we can see in this diagram that data validation and serialization, networking, analytics, internal utilities, and so on, they were sort of the heavy hitters of this technology. But with Compose Multiplatform, of course, that does change things a bit. So our last sort of statement had to do with, I want to know I'm not alone. And the good news of this technology is that it's already being used by big companies. And maybe this is the killer slide where I show you all the different people or companies that are being featured on our case studies page. Maybe you recognize some of these names, but they're big names. And we keep on seeing more and more case studies as they come along. So I want to just highlight a few of these. The first one is Meetup. You probably RSVP'd for this Meetup on Meetup. But this is the organizers app that they use with Kotlin Multiplatform. And they found that using this technology, they could now simultaneously release new features, that their team productivity actually increased, and that they had more collaboration and knowledge sharing between Android and iOS teams, which is really, really great. Netflix also uses Kotlin Multiplatform for their Prodigal app for film and series creation. And they just found, it just makes the feature delivery so much faster. And lastly, Philips, which is a Dutch electronics company, they used it to create their cloud SDK. And that made it easier for them to help developers, app developers, to interact with their cloud for infrastructure. And they found they could implement things faster, that the maintenance was easier, and that there was more knowledge sharing between teams. And you can find more of these case studies at kotlin.in/KMP case studies. Our ninth point, we're almost there, folks, is tooling support. Now, of course, you know that JetBrains we're really fond of our tooling. And so the first tool that I want to talk about is based on the IntelliJ Community Edition, and it's called Android Studio. And it is the de facto standard for Android development. It's got really a really rich set of tools for development, debugging, and performance monitoring. And it also has a plugin for Kotlin Multiplatform from JetBrains. The plugin was created by JetBrains that supports different things. It supports you for navigating between your common code and your platform-specific code, for running for different targets, and so on. There's also Xcode, which is not by JetBrains, by the way. That is from Apple. So Xcode can be used also to create the iOS side of KMP apps. So it is the de facto standard for iOS development, and it has a lot of development and debugging and configuration tools. But you do have to have a Mac. That is an Apple requirement. Sorry, we don't make the rules. But there is a new technology from JetBrains called Fleet. Now, Fleet is a lightweight editor with smart mode that has an IntelliJ backend. So all that IntelliJ IDEA goodness that you know and love is now found in a lightweight editor. And it's a polyglot IDE. What this means is that it supports many different languages. And in the case of Kotlin and Swift, there's actually cross-language features like navigation, refactoring, and debugging. So, for example, if you were to write your Kotlin multi-platform code, your shared code, and you connect with it via there's an API that you connect to from your Swift app, your Swift iOS app. You connect to this shared Kotlin API, and you can sort of integrate with it and so on. So you can actually go ahead and with Fleet, you can navigate between, to a method. You can refactor things across languages, and you can debug even across languages. It is distributed and collaborative, so you can have some pair programming sessions if you wanted to. And it's currently in public preview, and it is free during this time. And it's also a super, super supportive community behind Kotlin Multiplatform. And the first place that you can go for help is Kotlin Lang Slack workspace. And there's about 60,000 members on this workspace. And there's a couple of channels that will really help you get started. And if you have questions, you can ask them there. You can also ask JetBrainers, Googlers, and other knowledgeable experts like library creators questions, and they'll answer your questions for you. This is a diagram showing the multi-platform libraries per year, the Kotlin multi-platform libraries per year. And you can see that there's a definite uptick in 2021, when Kotlin multi-platform went, I think, into alpha. And it's just continuing from there onwards. It's just, skyrocketing. This is also some of the members of the community that are the most active. It's my colleagues and friends and people from the community that really write beautiful samples and create great videos and just do amazing talks. There's also Google, who's not my personal friend. Maybe it's your personal friend, but it's not my personal friend. But Google is there. They've been supporting us by taking some of their Android libraries and things and making them multi-platform, like annotations, collections, data store, which is sort of like shared preferences in Android terms, or just a key value store for Android. And now it is multi-platform. There's also Lifecycle, which is brand new, and we hope the view model will be coming soon. There's also a company called TouchLab that is very active in the community, and they've created really great libraries, open source libraries for you to use. Now, you're probably wondering, what about other cross-platform technologies? When should I choose KMP over Flutter or React Native or other technologies? Well, let's sort of think about why would we want to use Kotlin multi-platform. Obviously, because of Kotlin and the great tooling that goes with it. But it's also very easy to write things natively. There's a mechanism called the expect action mechanism that allows you to interact with the the sort of guts of the operating system very easily, and get to that guts of the operating system quite efficiently. And it also has it has really good performance. The code is actually compiled into native. So, for example, your code on iOS is compiled from your shared Kotlin code into using a particular compiler into native binaries. But you have to consider that the Kotlin multi-platform ecosystem and tooling are still maturing, and that there aren't as many learning resources available, but it is rapidly growing. So there aren't as many resources, for example, than if you compare it with Flutter or React Native. So how do you decide? Well, first you have to look at your team experience. If your team is only experienced in Flutter or React Native, then perhaps Kotlin multi-platform is not the right technology for you right now. But if you're a native team, you have some Android and iOS developers, then we're talking. So I'm not saying that Flutter developers can never learn Kotlin multi-platform, but it's just going to be easier for native developers to go ahead and start sharing code between because they already know Kotlin and they already know Swift, and they know the technologies they're going to have to use to build apps with Kotlin multi-platform. You also have to look at what kind of app you'll be building. If you're building an app with, that it has to be performant, it has to look super slick with very native looking UIs, it has to do a lot of platform integration, then Kotlin multi-platform is probably like the perfect fit for you. But if you want to do something like an MVP, something that is very like simple, then you can choose whatever you want to choose. It doesn't really have too much. It doesn't really matter too much between those three technologies, which one you choose. So I also want to implore you, please don't make Frankensteins. Don't use React Native with Kotlin multi-platform or Flutter. These are all separate technologies. Let's not make Frankensteins. So perhaps I've convinced you to try this technology, but what's next? So the first thing is I would advise that you start small. You start with something like a constant or a small shared irritation, which is gonna make your other teammates happy when you solved it and you start sharing code. There's also common utilities that you can share and so on. Then you work out your experiment plan and you think about the hypothesis. What do we think will happen? Will this sort of align our experiences better? Will this improve performance? Will this, what do we think will happen? Then we have to figure out what were we going to do to make our experiment happen, the method, and then we have to decide on how are we going to analyze our results. What is the conclusion? So a few things to think about when you work out your experiment plan has to do with the following things, like team roles. Who is going to contribute to the shared code? Will it just be Kotlin, sometimes Android developers, or will everybody contribute? In terms of workflow, how are you going to make and distribute your changes? For example, if we change the shared Kotlin code, how do your iOS developers get it in their workspaces? There's also things like coding standards. How do I create nice looking Kotlin APIs for my iOS developers? CI/CD and monitoring production. Those are important things too. So these are all kinds of things that you have to think about when you, want to create this experiment. And then I would actually go ahead and, after my experiment, I would take and do a retrospective with my team. And I would say, did this really work for us? If yes, do we want to expand the scope and share even more? If no, why? Is it a people problem? Is it a technology problem? Is it a tools problem? Was it processes or a combination? All these kinds of things to think about. So just to reiterate, the 10 reasons why you should try Kotlin multi-platform is firstly, because you want to avoid duplication, because it allows you to share code amongst, over a whole bunch of different platforms, and because of Kotlin and the tooling and that comes with Kotlin. Secondly, you can adopt this technology flexibly. You can choose what to share and what you want to write natively. You can also share UI with Compose multi-platform, so you can create really beautiful looking UIs with Compose. You can use it in new and existing projects. You don't have to wait for a new project to come around. You don't have to rewrite your projects to use this technology. You can use it in a new or existing project. And you can start sharing gradually. You don't have to go big bang. It's, you might feel that it's too risky. It is safe to start using it very, very gradually and make sure that you're doing the right things for your team and for your product. And then lastly, you're not alone. It's already being used by big companies. There's a tooling from JetBrains, there's tooling from other companies as well, and there is a very supportive community. And with that, thank you. You can find me on all the social medias at Pamela A. Hill.
Thank you, Pamela, for the talk. I think when you mentioned readability over concision, it made me think of why the ternary operator has gone for something more readable, if asked. So that's really resonated with me. Thank you for your talk. As I mentioned, team, we will be having questions in the Q&A section. So feel free to raise hands or to leave questions in the Q&A tab, and then I'll be forwarding them to Pamela. Maybe I'll kick off with one, Pam. You've mentioned Swift a lot in terms of interoperability. I've noticed while playing with KMP that some of the symbols printed out in my console were referring rather to Objective-C classes. So I wanted to ask you, you have been, shutting down that word. Is the transpiling into Objective-C, or is it pure Swift? Because I do see symbols that are in Objective-C. So
Yes.
what's
the
story then?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something that I'm really, that's one of my areas of specialty, is that Kotlin, Kotlin multi-platform, when it started out as a technology, it was around 2018. And at that stage, people were still, actively writing Objective-C apps, and Swift was still being, it was still maturing. It was still slowly being adopted. So we decided to go ahead and actually make Kotlin multi-platform interoperable with Objective-C. So there is an Objective-C bridge between the Swift code that you write to call Kotlin multi-platform code and the Kotlin code itself. So there are a couple of things that you can do to make your Kotlin multi-platform code read so much nicer in your Swift code. Most of them are sort of libraries from third-party creators. Like I mentioned, TouchLab, they have an awesome library that allows you to call to make your code look like idiomatic Swift code. But JetBrains is also working on creating really amazing Swift exports. So it will be a direct Swift export from Kotlin to Swift very soon.
Thank you.
We're working on it.
Right. There is a question from Brian. Brian, go ahead. Brian, you muted.
He may be muted because Cora needs to unmute him, maybe? Maybe if you can just pop your question in the Q&A, Brian, if you don't mind.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've been unmuted. Thank you.
We can hear
Brian,
you.
I've unmuted you. Sorry, you are ready to
Thank
speak.
you.
Okay.
Yes, I am. Again, following with Touch Labs, they provide a sort of plugin that allows an iOS dev to basically step through code from the Kotlin side. Is JetBrains planning on building something for Xcode that will also help in that, or will we just still be continuing with the third-party plugins and libraries for such tasks?
So, yeah, so I think like we JetBrains will mostly be focusing on our own tooling. So it will, if there is something like that, it will probably be part of Fleet. But no promises at this stage. I'm just, I think that if we were to make something like that, that it would be part of Fleet rather than something that goes in Xcode. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Maybe something for me. In your use cases and case studies that you've mentioned, most of these apps, are European-based company. Locally, do we have large-scale companies that have adopted successfully?
So I somehow sneakily came across a company that they were advertising for a Kotlin multi-platform developer. It's a well-known gym. So they have a gym app, and it's a well-known South African gym. So I'm not going to say who they are, but it's like there's one or two, so it's either one or the other. But they were looking for a Kotlin multi-platform app developer, and so I get the idea that they might be looking for something specific. Yeah.
Okay. And from the chat, I've got the question from Giovanni Veras. What's the status of Kotlin plus Swift interoperability?
Mm-hmm. So we've covered this a little bit in just our discussion earlier. So at the moment, we're still working with Objective-C Bridge. We still have a lot of help from the community with regard to what Brian was saying. It's a library. No, it's not what Brian was mentioning. There's a plugin called Sky, SKIE, which is such a weird like spelling of sky, but anyway, and it is for Swift Kotlin interop specifically, and that is going to make your interop look so much better. At the moment, our teams at JetBrains are still working on Swift export, but it is. I actually had a meeting with one of the project leads on this, and just when you're trying to align two languages that were designed to be different, they are not the same. Like, for example, how do you decide whether a class, a Kotlin class should be a Swift class or a struct? It's really difficult. It's really difficult to decide. So at the moment, we are working on all these things, and there will be a couple of talks and highlights in KotlinConf that you can go and watch for more of this. But that's kind of the status. Is we're working on the direct Swift export, and there are libraries and plugins and so on in the community that will help you with your Swift interop, make that just a little bit better. I see there's also one from Peter.
Yes. How close are we to having a future where we can develop Android, iOS, and desktop app purely in Kotlin? And is it feasible today?
I'm just reading the question again. So purely in Kotlin for iOS, you'll always have to have some bootstrapping code for iOS. But if you go have a look at, there's a website called kmp.jetbrains.com where you can download, it's like a wizard that you can see how you can actually create iOS, Android, and desktop very simple apps, but they are they're purely written in Kotlin with massive shared, like shared stuff. But the iOS side of it does need some bootstrapping with some SwiftUI things and so on. So, it's not going to be pure Kotlin, but it is mostly Kotlin, and that's what you're kind of aiming for.
Okay, I see no hands.
Okay.
Yeah, but before we let you go, learning curve, you did mention which teams or which type of individuals you thought were best suited to embrace this journey. You mentioned people who were native developers, and you mentioned that Flutter developers and stuff were not maybe the ones to put on the first line. But what about someone coming straight from varsity?
Why not? I think it is an excellent choice to learn Kotlin, to learn how to do desktop, iOS, Android apps straight away out of varsity, and to use the power of Kotlin to sort of launch your career. So there will always be like small things that you'll have to learn about different platforms, but I don't see a problem with anybody going and learning, a very good language like Kotlin that gives you a solid foundation for not just being an Android developer, but being sort of like a full stack developer as well, because you can develop on Android, you can learn how to do some web frameworks as well, and you can learn all kinds of different things in Kotlin, and I think that it's a good strategy to learn a language like Kotlin and a technology like Kotlin Multiplatform to sort of leverage your career, because I think that Kotlin Multiplatform is going to become very sought after. As time progresses, I think it's going to become more and more sought after, and people are going to get really excited about it. And it's not too difficult. There are definitely resources and people online that you can follow. Some of the people that I would follow that really have a nice like vibe around them is Philip Lackner. He is a YouTuber. He creates lots of interesting content, and he has a really nice style of presenting and showing people how to create apps with Kotlin Multiplatform.
Thank you, Pam. I know a lot of people will be very interested to following you on various social media. So please, if you can bring back those details again that you shared early on, it will help.
Sure. I just have to share. There we go.
While you're doing that, there's one question that came from David. We'll try unmute him.
Yeah, hi all. Pamela, thank you for the talk. Just a follow-up question from Saj's question. Are you aware if, I remember I learned when I was studying in campus, I learned some Java. Are you aware if they are teaching Kotlin in campus?
So I know that, I'm not sure if they're teaching in South Africa, but I know that they are for sure teaching Kotlin in Hungary and several other European countries already at university. Some of my colleagues are also university lecturers, or they do guest lectures at different universities, and they teach Kotlin.
Wow, thank you. That's nice to know.
Yes. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Pamela, for your time. And thank you, everyone, for joining us in today's DVT Tech Insights webinar.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening and enjoy the rest of the day.